Welcome to the Southern IPM Hour webinar series. We are going to go ahead and get started. Today, I'm really excited to hear from the Mosquito Beacons working group, and they'll tell you what that means coming up. The Southern IPM Hour is a webinar series that presents research, issues, and programs in integrated pest management from the Southern region. I'm Kayla Watson, the Communication Director for the Southern IPM Center, and we are one of 4 regional IPM centers supported by the USDA NIFA Crop Protection and Pest Management Regional Coordination Program with a mission to coordinate IPM across the region. And with our mission, we are happy to be able to fund a number of projects and working groups every year, and the Mosquito Beacons working group happens to be one of those. So really excited to hear how they are actually coordinating IPM across the region as it relates to mosquito invasive species. So just as a reminder, we do questions and answers at the end of the webinar, but if you have a question as we go throughout and you don't want to forget it, that's totally fine. You can put that into the Q&A box, and that's located at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And you can also put those questions in there anonymously. So if you just want to ask a question and you don't want your name associated with it, that's fine too. We get that. So just make sure that you know you have that option. And we are going to have 2 speakers today from the working group. So really excited to have Dr. Bryan B. Giordano and Dan Killingsworth. So welcome to both of you, and I'm excited for your presentation.
All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kayla, for the introduction and opportunity to share some of the exciting activities our working group has been working on this past year. So my name is Bryan Giordano, and I'm the project director of the Beacons Working Group. And I'm also joined by another co-director, Daniel Killingsworth, who will be my anchor during today's webinar. I was previously working as a research scientist at the University of Florida, and I'm currently transitioning into a role with Broward County Mosquito Control in the coming months. And I'm really excited for that transition. So today I will go over mosquito invasions in North America, tell you about our working group, who we represent, and what our goals and objectives are. Then update you on some of our current and future activities. So before we dive in, a little about myself. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and I studied under Dr. Fiona Hunter, one of Canada's leading medical and veterinary entomologists and author of The Mosquitoes of Canada, where I investigated transmission dynamics of West Nile virus. During my PhD, while performing routine surveillance, we discovered not 1, but 2 invasive species in southern Canada, both Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti. We also updated the list of local fauna in the province and found that Ontario has added 10 species over the past decade. And this is a combination of invasive species, but also natural range expansions. When I moved to Florida in 2019 to begin my postdoc at the Florida Medical Entomology Laboratory in Vero Beach, Florida, I began to see a similar pattern emerging here in the United States. Over the past decade, the United States has seen an alarming increase in the number of invasive species and range expansions. The vast majority of new country records occurring in California and Florida, where tropical and subtropical environments support mosquito proliferation year-round. These regions contain popular travel destinations, many airports, shipping ports, and truck yards, which have been implicated as the main dispersal methods for invasive mosquitoes. A common trait among invasive mosquito species is container breeding. So these are mosquitoes that prefer to oviposit their eggs in natural or man-made containers, such as tires, pots, or water-holding plants, such as bamboo or lucky bamboo. Another common trait is egg desiccation tolerance. And these are eggs that are able to withstand days to months without access to water while harboring a viable embryo, as seen there on the right. So why should we care about invasive mosquito species? Well, beyond adding more mosquitoes to the local fauna, which I'm sure no one here wants, a number of invasive mosquito species are also competent vectors for pathogens, and their presence increases the risk of transmission to these pathogens. For instance, the presence of Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti in Florida and Texas drives locally acquired dengue, chikungunya, and Zika virus infections. And these are common nuisance species to boot. So what is being done about this? There are currently no national contingency plans in place for invasive mosquito species. And surveillance and control is regional, typically dependent on funding and population of the area. Few programs share or utilize data sharing databases. Training opportunities are sparse. And new discoveries of invasive species or range expansions are often delayed by publication wait times. For instance, a common publication, the Journal of the American Mosquito Control Association, can take up to 3 months for publications to come out. And often, scientific publications and news stories don't include key morphological characteristics required for identification. So this was the driving force behind the idea for beacons, which stands for Biodiversity, Enhancement, and Control of Non-Native Species. And our motto is shining light on invasive and non-native mosquito species in the South. The overall goal of our working group is to increase the capacity for non-native and invasive mosquito surveillance and control across our region, while also raising awareness of new and potential introductions to help frontline mosquito control workers identify new threats. Our board of directors and members includes folks from the mosquito control industry, private pest control companies, public health agencies, and academic institutions covering both research and extension. And last year, our membership covered Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And for 2022-2023, we are excited to have expanded our network to include Texas and Puerto Rico, including the dengue branch of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in San Juan, Texas A&M, and the Texas Public Health Department. So the Beacons Working Group has 3 primary objectives. The first is to identify integrated pest management, research and extension priority areas for invasive species through stakeholder meetings. The second is to describe the capacity for invasive species surveillance in the South by directly surveying stakeholders. And the third is to improve knowledge transfer through stakeholder engagement and extension. The goal of our first few stakeholder meetings was to bring everyone together to discuss priorities for invasive species surveillance, control, research, and outreach activities. And this critical information will then be used to address the needs and knowledge gaps in the current surveillance and control systems, and to establish multi-state and county collaborations that are influenced by these stakeholder identified priorities following our integrated pest management model. So last year, we met quarterly for the first 3 meetings on Zoom, followed by our annual year-end meeting, which was held in person alongside the American Mosquito Control Agency's 88th annual meeting in Jacksonville, Florida, a major stakeholder group and an advantageous networking opportunity for us. During our first 2 meetings, we asked our members to discuss what they thought were the most important topics relating to mosquito invasions and some of the challenges or gaps in knowledge they have encountered. We compiled all responses and generated a list of 10 research topics and 10 outreach topics, and then asked the working group members to rank each topic from 1 most important to 10 least important, and thereafter assigned a point system to evaluate responses. So here are the results of the outreach and public education discussions. Our members identified that social media is a valuable and underutilized tool for disseminating information to stakeholders and private citizens. Webinars and virtual training opportunities were identified as the second most important topic, outscoring their in-person counterparts. And this isn't surprising given the events of the past year and a half, but it was noted that virtual training opportunities require less effort and are an affordable option to the benefit of smaller programs with limited funds. And the idea of invasive species symposia at annual state Mosquito Control Association meetings also scored quite high. On the research side, the membership identified a need for novel or improved surveillance methodologies, research studies pertaining to interspecific interactions and community dynamics, and that a lack of population genetic data makes it difficult to monitor biological invasions, identify point of entry, and the specific time periods the invasions occurred. Close behind were large-scale studies with integrated ecological and environmental data, natural ecology, species distribution modeling, and novel control methods. And we are currently writing a collaborative grant proposal to address one or more of these topics. So the second objective of our working group was to develop a surveillance capacity survey where we collect baseline data from our stakeholders to describe the current invasive mosquito surveillance systems across the southern region. Now, the target audience of this survey was mosquito control programs, including municipal, county, or regional programs, public health agencies that also perform surveillance activities, and private pest control companies. And the results of this survey will inform about knowledge gaps and deficiencies in coordinated invasive species surveillance efforts. We will capture important information such as budget constraints, mosquito trap types used, personnel training, where stakeholders receive training and information, and perceptions of invasive species, and many other related topics. Utilizing our membership, we created a database of mosquito control, public health, and private pest control programs organized by state. In total, we sent our survey to over 300 programs in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, and North and South Carolina. We received 106 responses, and of that, 92 responses were fully completed, which is an approximately 28% response rate. So here's some preliminary data I've compiled from the responses so far. So we asked programs to report budget allocations, and we asked this so that we can get an idea of which surveillance methodologies are costing programs the most. So you can see here that larval surveillance is the most costly. And of course, this requires personnel to spend time searching for sometimes cryptic larval habitat, especially if these are container breeder species where it could be a can, a potted plant, or a tree hole. Adult surveillance and virus surveillance accounted for 10 to 20% of budget allocations. We asked programs to report what proportion of annual budget pertains to personnel, training, conference attendance, and workshops, as well as outreach and public education. And we can see here that personnel costs for about 40% of the annual budget. In some instances, this amount is upwards of 70% and even as low as 10%. Most programs are only investing about 10% on training, conference attendance, and workshops. So this is an area that we're hoping to expand into to provide more opportunities for programs. And 10 to 20% on outreach and public education at campaigns. We captured program demographics, such as the proportion of full-time, part-time, seasonal, or interns, and their education and experience levels. And all of these data are necessary when aligning levels of workshop or webinar instruction with the goals and needs of stakeholders. We captured data pertaining to the length or duration of surveillance programs. This will help us get a better idea of gaps in surveillance across the South and identify weaknesses where a potential new mosquito invasion could go unnoticed. We learned that most programs start in January or March and end in November, and that the average program runs about 7.9 months. So we actually have fairly good coverage. We asked a few questions pertaining to mosquito surveillance at port authorities, airports, and shipping yards. And we found that 88% of respondents agree that cooperation between port authorities, airports, and shipping yards is important to monitor new and potential introductions. But of the 22 programs with active ports, airports, or ground shipping yards within their county or region, only 3 programs are conducting surveillance in these areas. The remaining programs, citing a lack of communication, issues surrounding security clearance and permission to access the property, lack of staff and budget for additional surveillance, and a few programs simply did not see a reason for the extra effort. So this is an area where the Beacons Working Group is looking to contribute this funding cycle to improve communication between mosquito control programs and shipping authorities, and to encourage routine surveillance in these high-risk areas. We asked stakeholders what tools they need to improve their surveillance and control programs. 35% of responses cited personnel as a major limiting factor affecting day-to-day operations. Some programs indicating vacancies that have not been filled for many months, others noting a lack of highly trained or qualified applicants. About 22% citing funding. Training and equipment each accounted for about 15% of responses. And this can include access to dry ice and other surveillance tools, particularly some traps such as the Biogen Sentinel trap, which we'll see in a few slides. These traps can be quite pricey, costing upwards of $200. Also, replacements for dead batteries, wear and tear, and broken and stolen traps that have not been accounted for in the budget. And programs without arboviral testing capabilities indicated this would greatly enhance their program. As we all know, funding and competent personnel limits our ability to do our jobs. And about 50% of respondents indicated that they are constrained by funding and staff expertise, which negatively affects surveillance and control operations. Furthermore, 70% of respondents are not satisfied with the number of training opportunities available to them in our region. So what do we plan to do with all this information? Well, we will combine and analyze these data at the state and county level to identify gaps in our surveillance network across the region. We hope to identify areas, for example, where little or no surveillance occur, or where trapping effort could be increased and sampling methodologies diversified to cover a broad range of species. We hope to identify regions or states that would benefit the most from cost-effective training opportunities and free online resources, as well as in-person training on non-native and invasive mosquito identification. And we are currently working on a manuscript that will summarize all these results, and these will be submitted to the Journal of the American Mosquito Control Association, which is widely read and respected amongst our stakeholder groups. So we are also working to improve training and collaboration opportunities in our region by providing free and fully funded training to stakeholders. In January of this year, we held a workshop on invasive mosquito bionomics and identification and data management and visualization tools in Panama City Beach, Bay County, Florida. We welcomed a total of 23 attendees from Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and South Carolina. And unfortunately, we had 2 workers from North Carolina that were all set to come, but a recent change in the COVID protocols resulted in them having to cancel last minute. But to promote professional development in our region, we acquired continuing education credits for Florida, Georgia, and North and South Carolina. Attendees received detailed training on key invasive species in our region. We provided learning materials that covered etymology, information on first description and locality, and the common names of species, as shown here. We provided information on larval habitat, dispersal strategies, optimal collection methodologies and trap types to improve the number of collected specimens. During my postdoc, I investigated how different trap types affect mosquito collections. I used surveillance data for 4 common surveillance techniques used in Florida. The suction light trap, top left, which uses a combination of CO2 and light to lure host-seeking mosquitoes. The Biogen Sentinel trap, top right, which uses a human skin lure. The gravid trap, bottom right, which uses fouled water to attract mosquitoes in search of an oviposition site. And a chicken coop exit trap, bottom left, which uses sentinel chickens to bait mosquitoes. And so here we can see in these pie charts the importance of selecting the right surveillance tools, as this decision can result in significant differences in abundance and composition of taxa collected. It's important to know how these choices will affect detection limits of species of interest and their abundances in certain regions. Furthermore, it's clear that different sampling methods can be used to preferentially collect invasive taxa. So diversifying collection methods can improve our invasive taxa detection capacity while capturing a more complete picture of the mosquito community in an area. We also presented information on host biting preference and peak activity periods, which can aid in both surveillance and control, as well as information detailing the native and invasive or expansive range of each species. And of course, knowledge of the local mosquito fauna or nearby mosquito populations is critical when identifying mosquitoes to species. To aid frontline workers in identifying new mosquito threats, we provided training materials to assist mosquito control personnel using morphological identification keys, a tool to guide taxonomists to the correct species based on morphology. We also provided valuable photos to help separate invasive species from similar looking native species. So for example, as shown here, sometimes invasive Aedes aegypti and Aedes japonicus can be confused with native Orthopotamia signifera. And to improve awareness of potential invasions, we reached out to our contacts at the Walter Reed Biosystematics Unit and obtained high-quality images of Aedes vittatus, a recent introduction into the Caribbean region from the India subcontinent. And Florida is currently on high alert for this species, and it is expected to arrive via shipping ports any day now. We are hoping that the more programs aware of this threat, and with the tools to accurately identify it, that we can quickly detect its introduction, limit its spread, or eliminate it entirely. Our website and Twitter account are up and running. The Beacon site will serve as a central hub for all non-native and invasive mosquito bionomics, news articles, and data sharing for our stakeholders in the southern region. It will also serve as a location for our members to keep up to date on past meetings. And we are excited to offer some unique products on the site, such as this interactive map where users can click on a highlighted area and it will guide them to the relevant mosquito identification key for that region. And we hope that this will facilitate improved species identifications. We are also capturing invasive species records from our stakeholders. So using this online form, programs can submit first occurrence records of key invasive species, which will feed into an interactive dashboard that will facilitate data visualization, data sharing among programs, and provide real-time updates on invasive species abundance and expansions in our region. And we are also working on a checklist of the local mosquito fauna by county and by state. So on behalf of the Beacons membership and board of directors, we'd just like to thank the Southern IPM Center for recognizing our efforts to bring together a diverse group of stakeholders in our region and to make a meaningful contribution in the fight against mosquito invasions. And I would like to thank the Southern IPM Center, the USDA for their continued support of the Beacons project, and the Florida Medical Entomology Lab for supporting our website and dashboard, and this long list of contributing agencies. We could not have done any of this important work without the support of our stakeholders. So before we jump on to Dan Killingsworth presentation, I guess we can take some questions now.
So if anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and put those in the Q&A. And we'll ask those before we move on to the next part. And Brian, I have a question for you.
Sure.
With all of this work that you all have been doing, what would you say has been the most rewarding thing about it?
The most rewarding, definitely the workshop. We had a lot of fun putting that together. It was a really great group of attendees. Everybody was really interested in the material and just super thankful that we were doing in-person stuff again. So yeah. It was a really, really nice opportunity, and I felt that we made a really meaningful contribution that's going to help people identify these key species.
That's awesome. It's always good to know that your work is valued, definitely. Well, I'm not seeing any questions yet, so what we'll do is we'll let people keep thinking about it. And actually, we do have one question. Roger asks, have you considered using simulation modeling to help target sampling in space and time?
No, that is something that I personally have not considered. But we do have some modelers on our board of directors, and they are really excited once we start getting some data from these stakeholders. And once we understand the data and we have a little bit of idea of the coverage, then we can assess what kind of models we'll be able to do. But we haven't thought about any simulations yet.
Perfect. And then Stas wants to know if you could talk a little bit more about the data collection. Where is that data, and what have been the issues with aggregation in the past?
Sure, sure. So I mean, there's a number of databases that people currently use. There's VectorServe, there's CalServe, a bunch of different programs. Just from some of the discussions that we've had from some of these programs, is that there are problems aggregating that data. So each data set has its own unique format, and so a lot of people have programs, or they'll have their data collection set up so it's in a specific format. So actually, one of our collaborators, Dr. Lindsay Campbell, I know that she's working on some different coding for that, using our programming that will try to bring all of these different formats together, and that will be able to export it into one single format. But that is going to be a problem. Data aggregation has been a problem for a long time with data sharing.
Always a challenge with data anyway, trying to get it all to work together.
Yeah, and that was something that we talked about during our workshop, and one of the morning sessions was trying to teach people how to organize their data. And there are there's a few publications that are out there. There's one using the myriad format, the minimum effort in reporting mosquito and infectious disease data. So check that out. It's a really great way to try to set up, especially if you're a new program, or even if you have some data that you're looking to organize. That myriad format, MIREAD, seems to be the best way moving forward.
Perfect. That's good to know. Thank you. I think that's all the questions we have for now. If you guys want to go ahead and start with the second half. And of course, if people do have questions, we'll go ahead and talk about those at the end of the talk. So that wasn't your last opportunity.
Great. Okay. I'll flip it over to Dan.
Thank you, Brian. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you. It's interesting to see what we've done in a year and how much was able to get done. This participation from everyone is very nice. Very good. Can everybody see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for participating. My name is Dan Killingsworth. I'm the Director of Operations for Environmental Security Pest and Lawn in Pensacola, Florida. We are a private pest control company operating from Mobile, Alabama to Panama City. Today we're going to review a Homeowners Association where we've done some mosquito management, and that management evolved over the last few years into what I would call an area-wide management that I feel we've had real success with. And so we'll go over some of those steps. But first, let's maybe review my views of what is integrated pest management. And I know that that definition can be ambiguous. Through the IPM Center, integrated pest management is a science-based, sustainable decision-making process that uses information on pest biology, environmental data, and technology to manage pest damage in a way that minimizes both economic costs and risks to people, property, and the environment. And it has a very good comprehensive definition. By all means, when I'm trying to train my personnel on this, or even for myself, I try to think of it this way. It's really about, to boil it down, you're managing your pest populations through feedback data and mindfulness toward the impacts that you put into that system. What kind of effect is the products you're going to put into the treatment? How is that going to affect the environment and the people applying the product, that kind of thing. So it's based on a set of values, and those values are going to vary depending on the system you're applying. Those values are going to be different for a farm center than they are for a residential neighborhood. And so all those things have to be weighed in, and it's a process. And so we'll review, over the years, the products come and go, the methods evolve, but the process, the integrated pest management process of stepwise mindfulness toward those inputs is what makes IPM work, in my opinion. And I think we can review why I think that works. So I take that IPM model a little bit further into what I call IP3M. So it's integrated people, process, and pest management. And this is what I think gives traction to my my trainees and that type of thing, because they can actually start to think of it in a modularly, right? So it is the people and processes that tend to promote pest issues in many cases. So it's a fundamental understanding of the human element and the ecological systems that we're working within is essential to recognizing the reasons behind those pest issues. And so, but it's the beauty of it is it's the people and processes that also are the solutions for controlling those pest issues and the implications of those actions. So, in the realm of mosquito management, all this is data driven, and so that feedback loop is required, and it is about the survey and the surveillance. And so, that survey, just for a quick review, a survey is simply a snapshot of what's going on at that current time. You string a bunch of surveys together, now you have surveillance that's meaningful that you can do something with. And only through that diligent surveillance can your data be collected to provide sufficient reporting capabilities where you can recognize those trends, map out your mosquito populations, different ways to visualize that data. It's only through that surveillance, mindful surveillance, that you get those capabilities. And then understanding the team and their tasks. You want to ensure that the folks that are doing the work have provided the information, the staffing necessary to get those things done. If it takes X amount of time to do this particular task, you have to provide that window of time for them to do it. It makes for a more harmonious work environment, and ensure that all those steps are taken and that they're completed and that corners aren't cut. So each and every time. This really helps. What helps this situation? If you posting schedules and duties, daily, weekly, monthly, on a calendar, so that everyone doing the work knows what's expected of them and they're to be held accountable. And then communication between management, your team leaders, team members is essential, especially when pest pressures are increasing and decisions need to be made quickly to solve those problems. Okay, let's dive into the mosquito management side of things. As I said, I operate on the panhandle of Florida and the peninsula of Alabama. In Florida in particular, there's two sides of mosquito control, and in most states this way, where you have the public health management methods, and then you have private pest control operators. They're two different standards, both through regulatory avenues, but as well as the expected outcomes. So public health pest control requires public health license, and structural pest control in Florida requires a general household pest or lawn and ornamental license. It no longer requires a public health license. And so my concern, and there's a general concern, that GHP and LNO service providers, the private side, they're not exposed to the mosquito ecology, mosquito ID work that's I feel is necessary for doing a proper job on the private side. So training is not compulsory for mosquito management for private side, and barrier applications are the conventional method in which I use as well. But barrier applications without regard for insect ID, mosquito ecology, or targeted pest management is improper. So that training for the public health measure is available, and here's a short list of some things I've done over the last few years to participate in, both the Alabama Vector Management Society meeting, which is actually tomorrow and Friday of this week. The Dodge short courses are a wonderful course put on through the Florida Mosquito Control Association meeting. Of course, the Florida Medical Entomology Laboratory puts on an ID course, which I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in. New Orleans Mosquito Control Rodent and Termite Division there puts on a training academy. All these are the materials out there. You just have to seek it out. So any level of pest management is not, you're not following through with IPM unless you have some mindfulness toward pesticide resistance issues. And so a big thank you to Dr. Buckner, Eva Buckner at the Florida Medical Entomology Lab for their work in doing pesticide resistance, in which we've been able to provide some material to them, and they provide data back to say, you know, how are mosquito populations reacting to the products we put out. And so this is an important service. So thank you, Dr. Buckner. Okay, let's dive into the Homeowners Association. The name of it is Heron's Forest, a community embraced by nature. This is from their website. It's a coastal residential community in Pensacola, Florida. It's on the intercoastal waterway, so it's as far south as you can get in Pensacola, essentially. And it was developed back in '98 with the Department of Environmental Protection conservation easement permit. So the intent is that the property retains predominantly the natural vegetative and hydrologic conditions existing at the time of development. So, you know, a soft footprint, essentially. This is 155 acres, a 2-mile perimeter. At the time, it was 178 homes. I think it's 183 now. They have commons areas, nature trails, and the wetland preserve. So the southern third of the property is all salt marsh preserve. So there's no treatments that come in this area. As you might imagine, it gets a little buggy. So I've been doing this work for a couple of years. We had some mosquito clients in the within the neighborhood. Some of the members of the board of directors at the HOA approached me about doing some level of comprehensive treatment in the HOA. So we did some evaluation first and what were the priorities of the neighborhood. And so from that, the board of managers of the HOA led consensus that the biting insect reduction in the commons areas, swimming pools, tennis courts, and basketball court was paramount, followed by control around the homes. So it was, you know, using those public spaces, those open spaces, what they wanted to get back. And a lot of this was the yellow fly issues that they were having because the tabanids there were pretty heavy. And of course, the protection of the nature preserve was heavily stressed. So here's a little graphic of the green trails. It's 1.2 miles of nature trails that are on the property. They cut this with like a timber axe, mounted onto a bobcat through and created some trails. So it's 5,400 linear feet of trails. Now, it's a beautiful area, and this is the kind of trails that they opened up, but it became almost inaccessible for the mosquito and tabanid activity, the yellow fly activity, deer flies. So we did an assessment around the property. You can see some of the little different ecological settings, a lot of things in bloom continually through the year. This culvert on this main trail and on the bottom picture, that is a spillover culvert, terracotta culvert, and actually had a little hole in it. And from that, I was able to sample Nigropalpus, right? So things were active continually. Some other challenges with the neighborhood. We did some sort of initial survey work. Some very easy stuff. The Culex quinks we found in the open drain system there. But if you look down where the pipe is cut, those are little containers, and those were holding Albopictus. So all within that area. So it is about, you know, what type of container in many respects. But those were right on top of one another. And if you look at the bottom picture on the right, left, excuse me, that was the bus stop. So the kids were getting bit up quite a bit. And so that was probably the real onus for asking what kind of, we can come in and do some level of control. So we set up 3 regular trap sites. One at Trout Point. Trout Point is the preserve area. So it's a kind of control, if you want to think of it that way, where no treatments can happen. So we kind of based our other populations on that preserve area. then one trap on the nature trail, and then one at the perimeter northwest corner. This particular homeowner allowed us on the property. There's a stream right behind that, a little creek actually, and his compost pile, which made for nice sampling. The first year we used backpacks for barrier treatments. The second year I decided backpacks are a challenge. I'm sure we've all seen them, the little steel 200s, backpack foggers. They're loud, they're leaky, they're heavy, they vibrate. The leakiness is really the real challenge because it gets on the operator. But also calibrating them is a challenge. The orifice there is not terribly precise. There's better methods. And so what I did was I created this parking lot leaf blower. I modified it to accept product through the nozzle there, and so it comes out at almost 200 miles an hour, the wind current. And thank you to Joe Iberg from Adapco. He met me once in Mobile, Alabama, and once in Baldwin County, and we did some droplet analysis, and we're getting it's at 150 to 180, 200 microns, which is ideal for the barrier treatments we're using, a water-based product, bifenthrin is what we're using, as most of the industry does. So for one, it took 3 people, 3 backpacks to do the work in 5 or 6 hours. I'm able to do this work. One person in the same 5 or 6 hours. I get better coverage, more precise coverage. The machine is also, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. Self-propelled, and so I have it calibrated at 200 feet per minute. I know my rate with it's an electric blower, or excuse me, pump, and so 0.2 gallons a minute. So I know my rate over time, over distance. So you have to have the right tools for the job. So we made a game plan, weekly surveillance during the time that they want us there. So we started out, the first year was 4 months. The next 2 years were 5 months, and it will be picked up for another 5 months this year. So weekly traps, the CDC light traps and dry ice, and larval sampling. I had ovicups out. There's a lot of activity on the property. I could probably have done a better job with placing the ovicups in an area that would be more secure, but animals were getting at them and dogs were curious, and I think people were curious, so I wasn't able to get consistent results there, and so I'll try again this year. Weekly treatments for the commons areas at the half ounce rate, which is a half rate. The nature trails at a 0.5 ounce per gallon rate. The retention ponds were treated, and 25% of the households each week were treated. So that at the end of a month, every house has been treated. And then the retention ponds with BTI when necessary. So after 4 weeks, all the households have been treated and then limitations assessed. And over that time, the math works out over those 4 months or 6 months, depending on the year. We're using less than 3.5 gallons of concentrate over that 2-mile area, which is and getting control. So it's much less product than I was using even for just the scattering of homes I had initially. So it's about that area-wide management is about attacking those areas that are of concern. You don't have to put product everywhere to get control. And the trick with this, the real key to success here is communication, both with the Homeowners Association and with the residents. So I knocked every door in this neighborhood multiple times, oftentimes, talking with the homeowners, assessing the challenges around the property. If it was a renter, I got the contact for the homeowner and discussed what was going on. And so that way everyone's on board with what's happening, and not a single person. Everyone is happy to have some level of management here because they did have an issue. And the results, we had over a 90% reduction of mosquito populations in the residential areas. They're areas of concern. Some days were more, some days were less, but 90% was a good number. The ancillary benefit, there was a significant reduction in the biting midges, yellow flies. I think this was due to frequency of the treatments in the nature trails and those harborage areas. Those trails really held the yellow flies. It streamlined treatments where it became cost effective and efficient. So I'll share the numbers with you. A standard mosquito treatment costs between $65 and $75 if you were just to call me up and as a single homeowner. For this particular job, we rated it at $16 per home, and that went through the HOA fees. And so over those 3 or 4 months, that's a very small amount of, it's a small bite to deal with, and for an overall coverage. And so everyone was happy. And the neighborhood survey showed those overwhelming satisfaction results. And so how do we measure success? If you'll bear with me, I'll read a little bit of this too, because I think it's worth going through. This was one of the managers of the HOA, and he sent me an email, wanted to touch base. They just got out of a meeting about tightening their budget, and they were reviewing the services that were provided to the HOA. And he says the entire room affirmed in the positive that the mosquito control plan is a great asset to the neighborhood. I did preface the discussion of the fact that yellow flies are not nearly as affected by this program as mosquitoes, yet the neighbors all stated they'd noticed a significant drop this year with yellow flies. So everyone was pleased. Then he states, when we first started this a couple of years ago, it was met with a lukewarm reception. So it's another fee to hit to every resident. But after 2 years down the road, everyone is very appreciative that the mosquito abatement program is part of Heron's Forest. So I look at that as a win, as a success, and I'm dialing it in even more, trying to be more mindful of the yellow fly issues and how we can better combat that. So, in conclusion, any successful mosquito management initiative must follow a regimented course of action based on need, surveillance, identification of the target species, and the areas of infestation. You have to have a plan. You work on source reduction, so it's not just about treatments. It is about reducing what promotes those pests, and then judicious use of chemical controls if necessary. And do the resistance work. And then continued surveillance to adjust accordingly, right? Because that's what IPM really is. It's about that feedback loop, right? You always go back and you reassess before you make another step. So the take-home message, I think, and as I try to promote private pest control standards, is that private pest control companies can achieve highly favorable results following best management practices for integrated mosquito management. And with that, I'm happy to take on any questions.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's, as I was saying from the previous presentation, it's nice to know that people are actually seeing your work and appreciating what you're doing. And I don't know, to me, $16 per household, and that can be taken out of the HOA, that sounds really awesome for them to have a place that they can actually, live and be in and not have to worry about mosquitoes, especially, thinking about kids at the bus stop and things like that. So
Right.
I just want to thank you for your work that you're doing and that the entire working group is doing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes. A lot of it's about, recalibrating expectations. Is it reasonable to expect zero mosquito activity, especially in an area like a property like that, where it's purposely designed to be nestled within the natural setting. That this comes back to the people and processes, right? We've established this particular situation. We don't live hermetically sealed, right? We're not in a bubble. So it's a beautiful neighborhood. It really is. So yes, I think it's a reasonable cost for doing the services, and more importantly, everyone's happy with it. So
That's awesome. So as we were waiting for some questions to come in, and I forgot to mention it to the speaker, so I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to launch a poll here for the Southern IPM Center, and we just want to make sure that we're hitting the mark with these webinars. So we just wanted to offer a chance to do just a very short poll here for us. So after attending this webinar, do you have a better understanding of this working group? Are you more aware of potential working group regional impacts? And do you have a better understanding of the importance of IPM? So if you wouldn't mind to just answer those 3 questions for us really quickly. And I do also see an error on some of the questions. It should say strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither agree or disagree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. So I'm sorry about that, and we'll definitely have to change that when we get the results back. But if you could take a few minutes to do that. And we also have another question in the Q&A. So this question says, the adaptation of the leaf blower is an amazing idea. Does this actually cause any spray drift issues compared to a backpack?
So I would say it's in line with the concerns you would have with any fogging equipment. You have to be mindful of wind and drift, and what's on the other side of that fence line or that hedgerow. You have to always be mindful. And so I limited. It's a 25-foot cone, but it actually gets about 20 foot of cone. But if the wind's exceeding 10 miles an hour, we just won't treat that day. I set it up for a Tuesday to treat every Tuesday. That way the neighborhood's expecting that, but also that gives us chances to make a new plan for environmental conditions, rainouts, high winds, that kind of thing. Yes, so we always have to be mindful of those. It's not, I wouldn't say it's any more than a backpack blower. Again, the backpack blowers leak on us, right? And I've modified those so that they don't anymore, but when you get them off the shelf, they do. Mostly that's about the band clamps inside the tank and that kind of thing. But it's an important component to recognize with IPM that for all the environmental stewardships we do, it's the applicators themselves that are in contact or in proximity to that product more than anyone else. And so to do it day in, day out, year after year, we have to be mindful of the applicator to keep it off of them. So that is about spray drift as well. And I do have this little windscreen that I didn't show in that image that I initially put on there, but I think that windscreen actually created this false sense of security, and so I removed it. So false sense of security for myself because I was the one using the machine. So either you can use it in the conditions or you can't. And so if not, you make a plan for another day. So we have plenty of other work to do. If we just have to move it a day, we just shuffle our schedule. So yeah, but that's a very good question. Thank you.
Good to know, and it's always important to keep in mind the applicators, like you said. They are an important part of IPM, and we have to make sure we're keeping them safe.
Right.
So we have another question from Thomas, and Thomas wants to know if you have any idea if there were any negative impacts on non-targets such as pollinators.
So I've been a beekeeper for 25 plus years, and so non-targets are always top of mind for me. And so we have a protocol, and I should have reviewed that protocol here about, of course, no open flowers. You walk a property before you ever do a treatment to see, for brooding bodies. There's actually one bee hive. I became a friend with a beekeeper resident there because we could talk bees. I didn't notice any appreciable difference in the bycatch in our CDC traps, more or less. Now, I didn't quantify that like I should, and I can start to do so and should do so. I don't have a solid answer for you on that other than I didn't notice an appreciable drop.
All right, good to know. And this would actually interest me a lot, this next question. Being a communicator, because I heard you talk a lot about communication and making sure that you have good conversations going on with not only your team, but people in the neighborhood as well. So besides door-to-door conversations, because you did mention that you're knocking on people's doors, were there any other neighborhood outreach activities that you did besides just knocking on people's doors?
So I skipped over that part as well. Sorry. So we communicate with the HOA. They have a property management company, and they've gone through a couple of property management companies while we've been doing this. But the process is the same. A day or two before the scheduled Tuesday treatment, either Sunday or Monday, because I'm doing the traps the Sunday or Monday before we do the treatments on Tuesday to get a baseline. I send that an email to them. They then send that email out to the electronic communication board through the HOA, so everyone is aware. Where it became a little confusing for them is that we were only doing 25% of the households every week, so I didn't indicate we're doing it on gralatorial and rookery and particular the tanager circle. I would indicate exactly the areas we were treating. So it tightened up my communication stream to be more precise with the residents as to exactly where we're going. So, and that always included the commons areas and nature trails as well. So yes, I let the communication board do its work, and I always offer my email and phone to the neighborhood, and no one ever abused it. And I'd have a few requests to come and evaluate the property for this and that. And a lot of it was about source reduction, you know, so we had a bunch of albopictus and some potted plants. And so that was about also training my technicians about doing the proper source reduction. We're not just treating. You have to evaluate the property, each property that we're doing. And so it only ends up being, you know, 60 or so homes at a time, 50 or 60. So it's not outrageous, and it's certainly doable with breaks, and it's not too taxing physically. Yeah, I'm more mindful, and I've told my technicians this. I'd rather you spend more time on the property assessing it than treating it. And so that had some impact on them, and they started doing just that.
Well, thank you. And it looks like we're coming to the end of our time, and I always like to ask this at the end of the webinar. And Dan, I'll let you go first, so I'll put you on the spot first to give Bryan a minute to think. But if you were to leave the attendees with one thing that you'd like them to remember about your talk, what would you like them to leave here thinking about?
Okay, there's several. I think the one that I really try to promote, and well, the main line of this particular talk is that we can elevate the private pest control operators' standard of treatment, right? We can, and this whole idea is to follow and mirror the public health surveillance methods. I volunteered with mosquito control back in college, back in 2000, 2001. And so I had a glimpse into that world of what that is. And so when we started this program, I decided we have to do it following this method. And so no private pest control company starts a service line out of the blue, right? It almost always evolves. It really does. It evolves out of a need, right? We're getting enough phone calls. There's enough traction here. People want us out there. So how do we do it best, and how do we increase that standard? I think that would be my take-home message today. Yeah.
What about you, Bryan?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Dan. I think mine would be definitely that, you know, the majority of invasive mosquito species are container breeders. So source reduction is going to be one of our biggest, the most successful campaign to be able to remove these invasive mosquito populations, and even just some of the native species as well will also lay eggs in there. So if there's anything that you took away from this presentation, it's you know, go home, check your gutters, look for pots or pans or anything that you might have sitting outside. Flower pots are always a big one. Remove that water, check weekly, and you'll definitely notice a difference in your own backyard over a short period of time.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for your presentation today. Daniel Killingsworth and Dr. Bryan V. Giordano. We appreciate the work that you're doing with the Mosquito Beacons Working Group. As a reminder, our next IPM hour is next month. It's Wednesday, April 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And this one's going to be on cotton leaf roll dwarf virus, another working group that is funded by the Southern IPM Center. And if you want more information about the Southern IPM Center, you can visit southernipm.org. Thanks for attending, and have a wonderful day.